Yeah.
Ready?
Sure.
All right.
You are the chair.
So I'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I will kick us off with the board's purpose. The board will govern lawfully with an emphasis on outward vision rather than an internal preoccupation, diversity in viewpoints and sufficient understanding of issues, strategic leadership more than administrative detail, clear distinction of board and chief executive roles, collective rather than individual decisions, future rather than past or present, and proactivity rather than reactivity. All right, roll call.
Johnson,
Here.
Moen,
Here.
Sharon,
Here.
Smith,
Oh, that's my first start. I'm always tempted to mute Gary too. Oh, he raised his hand.
okay, got it. And Vidovich.
You guys can talk now.
Here.
I'm trying to do 3-minute timer. All right, so, okay, public comment guidelines. I'm assuming we do have folks.
Approval of the agenda first.
Oh, sorry. Okay, do I have a move to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
And a vote. Johnson.
Aye.
Moen.
Aye.
Sharon,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Vidovich.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna read all of this.
I see, oh, yes, we do have public comment, yes.
During times of general public comment at a regular meeting, comments and questions may deal with any topic related to the board's conduct of the schools. Comments at special meetings must be related to the call of the meeting. During times of public comment on specific agenda items, comments should be confined to the topic of the agenda item being considered by the board. Speakers may offer such criticism of school operations and programs as concern them, but are encouraged to exercise their speech rights responsibly. The board encourages the discussion of all personnel matters to be conducted in executive session. Comments from the audience are limited to 3 minutes per speaker with no immediate response from the board except when deemed necessary by the board president. A single spokesperson should be selected by groups or organizations desiring to address the board on an agenda topic in order to avoid presenting repetitive information. When there is a large number of speakers to be heard, the presiding officer may shorten the time for each individual speaker and may limit the amount of time for all speakers. Let's see. Then there's a piece on orderly conduct. I need to read. All right, and so I believe that I can listen and do the 3-minute timer, but let me make sure I get Great, 3-minute timer.
Can we do the 3-minute timer, please?
Sure, great.
First person is Mary Tatum. Is Mary, oh, we set this chair over here.
Okay.
Slide.
I am commenting in support of the work of our current administration. I'm a Manitou parent with daughters graduating in 2013 and 2014 and a 21-year Manitou resident. The board and superintendent have every move they make questioned and demands for justification for every decision to agree that I have never witnessed before in our district. I, for one, do not view additional oversight and feedback for many district employees as a synonym for micromanagement. It was my experience that there was not enough oversight combined with constructive feedback in years past. A lack of oversight coupled with personal relationships between administrators, teachers, and parents 8 to 10 years ago created an environment of educators at times unwilling to do their jobs. And I'm not referring to the sexual assault cases which finally came to light and represent the worst of that culture. One parent in my daughter's class was told by an administrator that an issue could not be addressed because he was good friends with those of concern. And it just wasn't possible. My personal experience occurred when my spouse was quoted back to herself on social media after having what she thought was a confidential conversation with 2 administrators. When requesting that they enforce an existing policy, they asked her how they should go about doing that because this is Manitou. A lack of professionalism and appropriate boundaries, cloaked in an attitude of Manitou is special, created an environment in which great disservice was done to those who were not in the club. Changes in policy and new vision for a district are to be expected with new leadership. New leadership in any organization is always accompanied by attrition. That isn't a bad thing, it's a normal thing. We all change jobs or organizations for various reasons over the course of our careers. In education at this moment in our nation, 25% are making changes. Exhaustion and burnout, mental health, inflation combined with low pay and high student loan debt are just some of the motivators. And right now, teachers have plenty of options in the private sector with more opportunities than ever to jump ship for fewer headaches and greater pay. Manitou was desperate for a culture change and a higher level of professionalism, and thankfully we now have that opportunity. Please keep doing the important work. Thank you.
Next up is Colleen Johnson.
Oh, you're going to do a PowerPoint.
While I address the board tonight, it is the community I love, cherish, and defend that I really speak. My name is Colleen Johnson, and I have the honor to serve as the Director of Student Success for Manitou Springs School District. But that is just a piece of who I am. I'm a mother of 2 girls, the daughter of an amazing lady, an aunt, and a sister. In fact, I come from a long line of women on whose shoulders I stand. I am here today to tell you that now is the time to stand together as one family. Families are hard, complex things. They involve grace, unconditional love, forgiveness, and at times biting your tongue. I myself am a work in progress on all of the above. The next several months will be hard. The last several have been really hard. I know this to my core. My name has been on the news. My name has been on social media, and it has been passed around this community. The community I live in, work in, and that my children are navigating. On Friday, I received a subpoena. Things will be hard. We need each other. I will need you, my community, my family. I beg my community to lead, love, forgive, give, and accept grace. I think about Sean Lowe's speech at graduation, a child I have known since he was born, and his call to fight the darkness and embrace love. Our family, the Manitou Springs family, is about to have a very hard time. I ask all of you to ask yourselves, How will you show love, especially to the ones who need you now most?
Next up is Steve Weimer.
My name is Steve Weimer. The purpose of my public comment is to voice concerns for the core request that I received on May 12th. As a community member and a past school board director and president, I have deep understanding of Robert's Rule of Order and parliamentary procedure, the purposes of school board meetings, policy governance, and school district policy. Since I only have 3 minutes, it will not be possible for me to ask all questions or share all concerns I have regarding the core request. My core request was not to receive all of Gus Moen's email or Jack Sharon's school district email. I specified several keywords to only receive email containing these words. I have four primary areas of concern. One, observations of Jack's numerous dissenting verbal comments at board meetings involving bond issue, where I also read numerous inaccuracies in newspaper articles. Two, observations during the April 18th board meeting, where comments by more than one community member that suggested employment matters may provide information from executive sessions that are not meetings that are open to public unless employees specifically requests. Three, observations during an online meeting, MSSD 14 Community Engagement Forum, where Gus Moen was introduced and listed as a Board of Education director, but not as an expert speaker. Four, observations during the April 18th board meeting, where Jack Sharon attempted to veto the board's consent agenda for reasons that appeared unclear and random. In addition, I entered the Silk building. I noticed Jack Sharon talking to a person who later provided public comment and identified herself as a spouse of an MSSD 14 teacher who I found to be on the consent agenda's resignation list. At the April 18th board meeting, I shared deep concerns regarding appearances of conflicts of interest with some of its directors. I had three choices with core requests. I could do nothing, I could contact the press or write an article, or I could offer my thoughts to the board as I'm doing now. I urged the board to review the core information. As I read through these emails, I asked myself if the content was wrong, unethical, possibly illegal. I urged the board to do the same. I also urged the board to formally conduct community engagement sessions. Although public comment is a form of communication, it's not an ideal process to understand what community values. I urge the board to hire a professional mediator to conduct these sessions so free flow of questions can receive thoughtful replies by the board and school administration. Thank you.
The last one is Brenda Holmes statue.
I'm going to read parts of an email that many of you have already received, so I apologize that if it's redundant. On behalf of over 55 households, individuals, and families of the Stand Up for Manitou organization, we also want to thank all of the Board of Education and Mr. Mang for meeting with us. We want to recap and reiterate a few points that we discussed in the meetings that we had with all of you. We appreciate the acknowledgement that communication needs to be addressed to find both areas to improve and where the gaps occur. We suggest a summary of DAC meetings to be posted on the district website and a summary of BLT meetings to be shared with teachers and staff. We request a link that would help families to have an understanding and explanation of education vocabulary and acronyms so that all may comfortably communicate during discussions. We share our concerns about recruiting new staff and helping this new staff to know how to do Manitou with an increasing lack of mentors, that the work-life balance expectations have become unrealistic or unhealthy and should be formally discussed with all staff. We discussed the current evaluations and our wonderings concerning both its format and how comments are shared with individual staff members. Anyone who is surprised in an evaluation or disheartened shows lack of initial communications. We agreed that there should be no surprises during evaluations. We discussed the repeated comments being shared of certain staff feeling that their concerns could not be easily shared or respected, or feelings of not being valued. We shared that we are dismayed at the increase in staff turnover in Manitou among administrators, teachers, and staff. We know that this number continues in an upward trajectory in a district that used to have minimal turnover. We believe a third-party staff survey and exit survey would be an ideal way to better understand staff sentiments and departures. We have reached out to all the Board of Education members and yourself and formally met with all but Gus Smith. We've explained the above concerns and the absolute need for benefits of a confidential out-of-district third-party survey. We have researched and supplied an exit survey to be completed at no cost to the district by an organization that has been used by Colorado school districts. New Measures has the expertise and the reputation to ensure that a survey would be completed professionally and anonymously for all participants. Those offered this exit survey would be former staff who supply a personal email. We have requested 2 years of retired or resigned employees, but are able to extend the same email to former employees 3 years out based on the ability to reach these former staff members.
15 seconds.
Yes, just to let you know, we are going to go forward with that survey and to have it be sent out by the 15th.
I'm just gonna do a quick correction. It was Gary Smith and not Gus.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? It's a regular meeting minutes.
So moved. Second.
The vote. Johnson.
Aye.
Moen.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Vidovich.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Superintendent's report. Yep, Susie will present the budget.
Sit over here.
Yes.
Okay, so a few things have changed since we did our proposed budget just a couple weeks ago. The biggest one is the BEST grant. So I'm going to get into that. It kind of, if you look at the overall numbers that's in board docs, you can just see the differences. So I just want to review why it changed. Okay, so some of this is repeated. I just updated numbers with new information that we had. So we have a little over $100,000 in estimated retirement and turnover savings. We had a reduction, sorry, that was weird. A reduction of a little over 200,000 for some positions that we're not refilling. This is 2 certified positions and 4 classified positions. And then, I'm sorry, I apologize, there's an error on there, but it's an increase of 1.5 positions. This is the 504 coordinator. So really what we did at the high school is one of those positions that's not being refilled. We changed into a 612 504 coordinator and then a 0.5 HR director. And then also some public relations contracted services that are also being added in here that I didn't have in the proposed budget. So right now we're using ESSER funds to pay out, to do some marketing for the school district, really to boost enrollment and just to do a little bit to continue that into next year since we don't have that type of position within the school district. And then like I talked about before, utilities just keep going up and up every month. So those costs. And then the big part is that BEST grant and then our COPs that we received earlier in the spring.
Ask a question. So the HR director, that's a new position that'll be posted?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And we went back and forth. We had talked about a full-time, half-time, and I think Elizabeth and I both think that half-time
Is it?
is enough. Yeah. So best grant, I think everybody here is aware that we received the best grant. It's not, I think the official announcement will come later in June, but we are very high up on their list. I think we were in third overall out of 60 something applicants. So we'll be getting that. And remember, this is a matching grant. And so we're going to see that have to use that $4 million in COPs to match the best grant to get that $1.1 million from that. And then, so I'm kind of played around with this because we will be receiving the best grant in the 22-23 school year. So that's where the numbers on that general fund summary really changed. On the proposed budget, we had a huge deficit in this year because we were going to start paying some of those, paying off the COP, I mean, not paying off the COPs, but expending some of those COPs, and now we're receiving that best grant. So then it takes it out a year. So next year, we're gonna, in the 1 year, it looks like we're spending a lot of that down, but it's really just because we've received an influx of money from the COP and best grant, and then we're gonna start trickling and spending it. So again, salary and benefits, we did a contracts for 5% increase to all staff. This includes also classified doing, I think there was 37 overall employees that we did market research. We did market research for all but 37 that we touched on the classified side. We do have some benefit increases to the employees. So it's a 7.5% healthcare increase. That's going to be shared by both the district and by the employees. The district is picking up short-term disability, which is something we never had in the past. And then there's an increase to para both on the employee side and the employer side, a 0.5%. So the employee side is the one that's really tricky because that was stuck at 8% forever. The employees paid 8% into para, and it's been going up and going up and going up. And now we're at 11, we'll be at 11% starting July 1st. So this is a significant cost really to our staff and their take home pay. So that's the memo that we sent out to you guys to kind of talk about that. As I went through and reran numbers, especially this year's projections based off of some things with the best grant and with all of that, with the best grant and the COPs and new projections, I think that we can do a little bit more. We are seeing districts around the area do 5% is pretty much the lowest around. So I wanted to see what we could squeeze out with being conservative and making sure we weren't hitting the out years. But I think we can get up to 7% overall with still in those out years, still remaining at a very healthy reserve over where the reserve would still be higher than it was pre-COVID. So it's hitting it, but not hitting it significantly. I think one thing I always say is I budget very, very conservatively, and that's where I went in with the proposed budget and looking at it and looking where everybody else is. I feel like this is the best thing to do, especially with that para increase that is going to hit their para increase and health insurance increase, so that they're actually seeing an increase and not just absorbing it with those increased costs.
And likewise, if enrollment increases, there could still be potentially an adjustment in that December timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
And we did 4% last year, is that right?
4% last year.
And the short-term disability, that's a new benefit.
That's a totally new benefit that.
2 weeks, 90 days, is that what that is? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So do most districts have that? I don't have that.
Yes, most districts have it. That's the one thing I say all the time. I came in here, I'm like, we don't have this. And then I kept asking Hub, and they're like, you're really the only one of our school district clients that don't have that. And
So
so
we're assuming that cost for the employees.
Right, that's a real benefit.
it's a huge benefit, absolutely. That's about a $72,000 a year cost to us. But I think definitely something that people will see and be happy about, better than them having to take the unpaid days that they've had to in the past for those types of things.
It doesn't seem like a crazy amount of money, a couple hundred employees, is that right?
Yeah, it's really not bad.
No, that's great, that's a good investment.
Yeah. We've talked about this, we're still projecting low enrollment. I'm hoping that come October, this is higher and then we can do something about it, but it's those primary grades. It's really hard to see on this small screen, but you can see that kindergarten first seconds just really dips down since COVID. So targeting marketing, and that's why we have that Shane, who does our marketing and our social media for us right now. And I already discussed this fund balance. It's going up right now because we're receiving that revenue. It looks like it's gonna take a hit as we're spending some of that capital money, but overall, we're still very, very healthy. About $6 million versus the pre-COVID of about 4.5. Any questions?
So that $6 million doesn't include the COP invest grant.
It is in
It
there.
doesn't include that. So that'll go to,
Well, it's in there, but all the expenses are also in there.
okay. So-
I just don't have the exact time because of construction costs as to when we're gonna actually get to spend that money. So I have it broken out over the next 3 years, but yeah, it's in there.
What was the best grant award amount?
It was the part that they'll be giving us is like $1.1 million. We have that huge match now. We're at 72%, so we're paying the majority of it.
We score high.
That might be part of I think we had a really good proposal, but the amount that we need is relatively small compared to some of the other asks.
And just on that note, we have put out the RFP for the owner's rep, and that should close, I think, they have to submit by June 15th.
Yeah, next week. We should have, yeah,
Is Wimber applying again, I assume?
yes. We've had so far, two people notify me that they are, two groups, them being one that are submitting an RFP.
They had to notify us by Friday.
All right, so if you guys are okay with this, I think it could be wrapped up into one motion to approve the adopted budget as presented and the salary schedules.
Susie, can I ask a question or give some thoughts on that after you answer the question?
Yeah.
So when we talk about an increase, and if we adopt this, that increase would be applied as a percentage evenly across all staff?
Correct.
Okay, so I want the board just to be aware of a historic discussion that has happened. So that is how Manitou in general has historically done raises, has been taking that percentage and putting it across all staff. The conversation came up a couple terms ago about at what point, or is there a point we look at various job classifications? And I know we've worked at getting people within the same range, and we've done a lot of work in specific job areas that way. But just so the board understands that means administration, certified staff, classified staff, everybody, even those at the very top of the pay scale, including our superintendent, will get that percentage. I'm not saying I have an issue with that. I'm saying the long-term on a trajectory, if the same percentage is applied to every member of the organization, people at the top will continue to have a widening gap between other positions and other ranges. So just something to be cognizant of when we make those decisions. That is how sometimes in some districts there gets to be disparity or a widening disparity in the salary. So something to think about.
There are some that will put in a 7% for classified staff that are not administrative, and then it can wane after that point. So there's a lot of different ways school districts do that. But it is something that Tina and I actually talked about as well.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot that just do a percentage, and then some do. I know a couple of our neighboring districts are doing a percentage and a dollar amount. So there's just, different ways.
Do you have any thoughts on that since you're the expert?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely increases the gaps for sure. We'll see that all the time. I think the one thing when it did get brought up I don't even know, that was 4 or 5 years ago. I feel like when we kind of really talked about it was that's how Manitou's always done it, and that's what people expect here. I don't think that means anything, but that was definitely part of the board conversation at the time. I think there's pros and cons for every way.
Yeah, that was 5 years ago, Susie. I think it was yeah, I mean, I remember the conversation pretty well because I think some of us walked into the meeting, possibly not fully have read or thought or just knew that was tradition, and had assumed the pay increase specifically at that time was for just teachers, to find out that was not the case, how we were applying it. And we had said that we would review it at a later time. Thanks to COVID, kind of everybody kind of froze salaries for a while and budgets froze. And now we're looking at, with PPR being increased and other funding sources, as looking at how we should now apply those and leverage those monies and those increases. So again, to be thoughtful and, you know, again, thinking about how that plays out, not just this year, but 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
So that could be some on the list too for DAC questions, as I kind of think about that salary compensation committee. That is a standing committee. That could be some really good research, and just make sure that the ways these are happening are aligned to our values. You know, when you look at starting salaries for our teachers, they're comparable to other districts, but really looking at the distinctions and how do different roles start in different districts is something that would be some really good work of the DAC potentially.
So maybe do it this year and then reevaluate in a more thorough way when we have more time.
Yeah, and this could be something, if that was going to happen, that would need to be sort of in a time frame by like December recommendation to the board, because as Susan starts building out the budget for the future, and then also just to see what the economy does. I mean, we don't know how it's going to be flipping very soon.
Be Natalie's pink bike.
Yeah. Doesn't solve all of the things.
Hey, Natalie. This is
Yeah.
Gary. Hey, I just wanted to say that we did look at, I know what, last year, year before, when we kind of brought everybody as far as teachers a little more together from the ones that were way out of bounds. And we did that. And I also think that, I totally support adding this 2% all across the board, because, if it wasn't for everybody here, from food service to administration, we couldn't make this organization work. So I really don't have a problem with, let's give them the 7%. And if we got to look at something in the future, let's do so. But, it might be my mistake, but I thought we did a lot of that last year, the year before, bringing some of the teachers and things together.
Do you want to address that?
No, I mean, that's right. That was the work of the DAC in our first year, was really to work on certified. So we focused on certified last year, classified this year, and have a large number of different ideas for next year. So.
Well, to Gary's point, that was due to grade disparities, due to practices that were kind of supported by anyone in this room. So to that point, I think it's definitely worth looking at different ways to do it, just so we know what's available. Like, I have not seen different models. Anytime I see growing this disparity between, as you're talking about widening that gap, that always makes me cringe. And so, we do, I think, want to look at what's available and make informed decisions on that.
I think it is important for the public to know, like in my contract, there's no bonus, there's no incentive bonus for a lot of superintendents do have certain incentives in there. That's just never something that I would include in any kind of contract. So it's been a straightforward, but there are a lot that have other incentives to that.
All right, we're ready to move forward.
So I make a motion to move approval with the budget as presented and add a 2% increase going from 5% to 7% across the board for all staff in the district.
And salary schedules.
And adopt a salary schedule.
And adopt a salary schedule. Thank you.
And a vote.
Thank you. Yeah.
Did Gary have?
Gary, you guys
You
want
wanna
to
say
say
something?
something? So did you move it?
We moved it to, okay. Johnson.
Aye.
Moen.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Bennett.
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, policy review, we've got our work out for us tonight. Under policy review. So the first policy, wellness policy, is pretty straightforward. As much as possible, we're trying to eliminate titles. So that first one is really just a quick adjustment for it was the Director of Partners for Healthy Choices, and it's still PHC, but really those titles are falling under District Wellness Team, so it's a minor change. Nothing nuts.
Have any questions regarding this?
On the wellness policy, my only question was kind of referring back to the DAC charge and including trauma-informed care in our district. There's nothing related to that in the wellness policy, which I would think would fall into wellness.
Okay.
That's my only point.
I would agree. And then so this is some of the work that Jane and Danny are working towards, and they agree. In fact, in their action plan, they have a whole leverage point that's specific to actually the practices that we are investing in, resources, training, and just time. So that is part of theirs, but this was for compliance with the CDE. We need to review it now, but it is part of their action plan.
Is it something that we could add that language today, or do you feel like that's language that will change over time?
I think it would be like Danny, their PHC and that collaborative work with the community would be them creating that through PHC and probably presenting that to the board. Do you feel comfortable with that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we're a policy board, so we would look to incorporate these ideas within policy. So as long as, if we have that opportunity to do so, then yeah, I would support that. But I would certainly want that to be included because it's as important as anything else in that policy.
When is that PhD presenting? Do you know?
Well, their action plan will kick off in the fall. So then, but there is a specific action plan around these policies. So both the policies at the school level, but also this administrative policy. So I would imagine that it would kind of be on this cycle. This is a policy. Policy A was reviewed pretty early in the school year. Let's see.
So that's separate from the district action plan.
It is different, yeah. So each of these departments and each of the schools have their own action plans that feed into our overall district action.
Do you think, Elizabeth, that would, if we were to incorporate the work they're doing on the action plan, would that go into this specific policy? Do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what do you think timeframe that would be appropriate if they're working on it? Obviously, you'd want that work to be done, before updating the policy. So
Yeah, and this is just, I think we can review it, not like review it, and it's fine for us to table it and not approve it. We can pause. This is such a minor change. It's not necessary. We want to just pause, and I'm happy. I think that is very much aligned to the work of PhD. So we can pause on that.
I mean, I think it's up to you guys. I think this is your part of why you're on this board, so I'm up for it.
well, like I said, I mean, I'd be fine tabling it then until we could add those pieces in.
This policy as it written still meets our abilities to report to CDE that we have a policy of this nature, and then that ongoing work, but they 100% agree that this does not capture yet what we're actually doing.
So maybe not approving it, just so we know, like, because otherwise we're going to show it's revised today and then maybe not remember to look at it.
But that's what.
That'd be my concern, because I'll forget.
Do you feel comfortable with that, Jack? Or?
I think either way is fine. I think Kendra or Elizabeth can certainly keep us on track, but we have to re-review it in 3 months, and that might give us room to actually make it a better policy. But if it's functional now and meets the needs that we need for CDE, maybe we do have the first reading, but have it on the agenda for, I guess that'd be in September.
I think it's gonna take a look, because the school comes back, PHC doesn't form until that September month. This is real, like, community engaged work with all of his partners, including the school wellness teams. I would say probably more, it was probably more like December, January.
Yeah, I'm just looking at their action plan right now, and they have it as an indicator of success, but yeah, not until the spring of this next year for those reasons of getting those engagements and whatnot, so.
I mean, so back to you guys, if that's the case, is it better for you all, table it with, since this is such a minor
It's
change?
absolutely.
Okay.
Gary, Tina, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think that actually that's a great idea to continue to align better with our priorities.
I'm good with it.
Okay. All right, so do we have to?
I did unfortunately have like a little formatting issue. If you notice, the goal number 1 isn't bolded as the other goals are, so nitpicky, but just, well, we're editing and revising it anyways.
Okay. But we don't need to make a motion to postpone, we can just move to the next. That's right. All right, first reading, the number AC update.
The document that I'm looking at too, that kind of help guide this conversation, and it's good John is here as well. When we, from the arrest, from the some other things that have popped up, really looking at boards or these policies. So John and his team did a review. We did a review, and then we also had Employers Council also review. So just want to add, and I also want to give credit and acknowledgement to our equity team. They really looked at this policy of non-discrimination, and they did this all last week. So thanks to that team about that. So we'll kind of go through AC, and then I'll just pause after each one and see if there's any real conversations. Natalie brought up a good question, a point that I want to make sure that we don't miss. So let me just get to the right documents here. AC. Kat, are you able to bring it into this?
You can bring them up.
Yeah.
Are they for us?
In Word docs.
So you see is titled employment docs, it's the third one in.
I'll kind of keep going. The addition that Natalie recommended too is a veteran status. So I just made a tweak. So it reads under basis of disability, race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, ancestry, and veteran status. No, it's not titled AC non-discrimination plan.
It's the third one, it's the third one on the top. So under employment docs, it's that one. That's right. That one's the top.
It says employment.
It's employment, no, one up. That one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm calling it. That's what that way.
So these definitions have been added to include.
I'm just gonna share my space.
Perfect, thanks, Ken. It's pretty straightforward in that sense, and there's it's important reference to the cross-reference policies. That's what we really cleaned up, and we saw that they weren't always referenced to the right policy, and making sure that that's happening there. This was really to be comprehensive of all of protected classes through EEOC.
And this is all pretty much CASB boilerplate.
It is.
Did the employment council, they've had anything to do with any corrections, or do they have any edits to
They
your?
read the G policies.
Okay,
And John and their team read all policies.
Just thinking about what you added, and I like the additions. Would like school groups or clubs, or would that fall in here, or
Yeah, like, okay, you give me an example, make sure I'm answering the right question.
just like can't think of the names of any school groups and clubs. So, yeah, it's escaping me. Just any group, school sponsored clubs or groups that meet.
It would be any individual who meets as part of that. So if they fall within the protected class and they're operating, they're discriminated based on the grounds of race or sexuality. Put it under that group, is that what you're talking about?
You are just discriminated because you're a part of this group. You know, you're seen being as a member of this group and you're discriminated against because of that.
Yeah, it would be on the basis of these equal employment opportunity and or students under these protected classes.
So it always boil down to the individual.
I'll let John respond to.
Try to think of an example.
Protected class. So it depends on the group. I mean, if it's an art group or something, depends on the circumstance. It'd be an individual belonging to a group, and that group is a protected class.
Okay.
And those groups and that protected class is listed right there.
well,
Otherwise, you get in, I mean, you could arguably get in to the right to have the group and be a member of the group and so on. And that would point to other policies about student groups and so on. And making sure that's being applied appropriately and so on.
We can't discriminate on a child being in a particular group. And
Right.
if they're in a protected class as well, then this would be something else that we would consider. If they felt like they were being discriminated or harassed or bullied for being affiliated with that group, absolutely, it would fall under this policy.
so this almost includes everybody. I mean, it kind of would, because there's religion or no religion or national origin or, you know,
They still have to be
Norwegian or
protected
Canadian
classes.
or.
The protected classes are pretty large.
Changes to this one.
No, just not an addition.
Thanks for that.
Gary, Tina, are you okay?
Yes, thank you.
What's that? I was just looking for the.
Sorry about that. I'm good.
So the next one we'll look at is ACE1. That's the complaint form.
You don't want to make a motion, that's up for you.
I think we can make a motion on all of them together unless there's a change, then we can move them all out. It doesn't matter, whatever you.
So all the ACs together, and then all the GBs together, and then all the J.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what we do.
makes
Is
sense.
that okay?
Sounds efficient.
So
Is it complaint form?
the complaint form, yeah. Right, so the real change, actually, we added this, when did we add this? I want to say we added it a year and a half or so ago. We didn't have one. We have it now. But the check here is that please check here for allegations of sex-based discrimination and sexual harassment. That really falls under Title IX. Because if that box is checked, it really does push into a whole different protocol and process and procedure. So just having that clear distinction, I think, will help information as it comes into us. As we know, Title VII on the basis of race or religion. So just making sure disability under Section 504 IDEA. So this really does create a different pathway if there's a Title IX allegation. Nothing other than that. Changes.
Yeah, looks good.
Right, I'll go to ACE 2.
Trying to find it too. Two is the bottom left one, the last one. Last one. The equal opportunity two.
Yeah, equal opportunity. This is just really defining for any individual who needed to make a complaint is who to report to. And it's super important that we don't make it a person's name here, but they know who to report to. So we've done a lot of work on our website around who to report to and this. But anything student related would go to the Director of Student Success, and who also is our Section 504 compliance officer. And then anything employment related and or Title IX would go to HR. And then from the HR processes, then if it's a student or staff member, or if it's student to student, whatever the case might be, then that Title IX compliance officer really sets in the course of action there. So it's very complex, and oftentimes along the way we get advisement from John as well. So nothing significant here.
Who's our current Title IX coordinator?
It's Marshall Weimer. Questions? Let's keep going. Next one is ACR1.
For the procedure?
It's titled Equal Opportunity. No, it's titled Equal Opportunity 3. On that list is the top one.
First one?
Yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
No worries, thanks, Kat. Okay, so just to define who the compliance officer is, the complainant, and then the respondent. Questions about any of this?
So the edits that are in there in red, those are in addition to what the original CASB policy said?
And or we're new from CASB.
Okay.
This all falls under non-discrimination, so protected classes. And this last one, this ACR 2. Just around the procedures for investigating. This is a new policy under Title IX.
So safe to assume this is a state mandate policy?
Yes, it is. I do see a name mentioned here, so for the second reading, we can change that under this Title IX coordinator. We can make that Title IX, that human resources.
So that's under investigator.
It's under Title IX coordinator, under. Scroll up, please, Kat. So the second page,
Right there.
right there, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Questions?
We can approve its reading one with that deleted.
That's with that revised.
Okay.
Any discussion? I guess we can make a motion first.
I would move approval for the first reading of AC, ACR 1, ACR 2, ACE 1, and ACE 2 with the two addendums that we have discussed.
Second. Discussion, I would say, just in general for us, when we're dealing, especially with these types of policies, that we understand policies are cold and they're to be followed, but also how are they followed? So I think it's worth acknowledgement when someone is moving through this process, how we are following policy, meaning how we're treating them with relationship and through a very delicate process and really opening that door. I think as we've talked before and with the community engagements that we've done is really to, one, make the path clear for everyone as to what their rights are and how they can move through these policies and processes, but also our job on the other side on how to allow that path to be done in an open and safe, supportive way. Would just be, my thoughts as I read through someone that's going to be bringing a sexual harassment type of a claim. That's a very hard thing to do.
It is, it's hard for the reporter, it's hard for the invest, there's a lot that goes into it, and I would say that each time they're always different, and so the level is always depending on the person who's experienced whatever the case might be, but then a person goes through the process, it's stressful, it's painful, it's hurtful, all the emotions come up, and so we're always seeking ways to ensure that gets better.
Yes, I think about like, if someone didn't follow it appropriately and we had this, you have to do this first or something like that, just to make sure that it's, one, we try to avoid doing that, and two, if we do it with care.
Title IX changes quite often too, so it was set for a few years and it's now changing again, so we just have to be very aware too of all the changes that come.
Right. Tina, Gary, do you have anything before we take a vote?
No, thank you.
No, I don't.
Vote. Johnson. Moen. Sharon. Smith.
Aye.
Vidovich.
Aye.
Right, so we'll jump into the GBs. These are the ones that, of course, John, Employers Council also looked at. So we'll start at GBA. I don't know if I can find it for you. I think it's called Equal Employment Opportunity. Yep. So we had a form of it, but it just includes to add all of the protected classes that are mentioned. And so I would like to add veteran status as well. Are you all okay with that?
Sure. Does that include Natalie's addition?
Yeah, it doesn't, but I want to add it to this. So after genetic information, I'll add veteran status. Okay with that one? This is one where there were so many changes to ours that we just went straight with the CASB's boilerplate because it needed to be updated. So it's GBAA.
Second one on there. The second one is there.
So if it falls under this category, then the person would follow the AC reporting processes because that's, since it's a protected class.
And guided by Title IX.
Thank you. And that is important. On the second page, the second paragraph, that says all reports of sexual harassment, compliance officer ACE1, we just believe it's important to reference the actual policy that Gus, to your point, like how to make sure it's clear, which format am I actually using and am I using the right form? To kind of put that out of the barrier. Same for that paragraph above, just referencing AC only.
Do these all follow the if this then then situation that we dealt with before? So if your complaint is against this person that you would normally bring this to, it goes to this person type of thing.
So that's when we get into the GBE, we'll get into sort of order.
Okay.
But so in like Title IX, if the compliance officer recognizes that the person who's being sort of accused of something is the supervisor, it wouldn't go to the supervisor. The investigation would not be managed by the supervisor.
Right, okay.
And that's spelled out in Title IX.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that Title IX becomes like more of a team approach to say, all right, it happened in this building. You don't want, maybe you need someone outside of that building conducting the interviews so that you can protect either those relationships or the situation, where, especially in a small district. We actually have talked about too, for example, I just got trained to be a trainer, and so is Marcia, and there are other districts in the area, so how can other districts support into these processes? So there's a more objective, neutral perspective there. Then the next one is GBEA, staff ethics. Third one. Conflict of interest. Read through these. Questions? I'm just really glad we're updating this a little bit. Yeah. And we had internally in our business office, that red line, the business office maintains a procedural document regarding this matter. And this will be posted in the business office locked file room. That's not CASB, that's something we added because in our community, we do have folks who know people, and there are folks who say, even though I don't fall in this category, that somebody that I know doesn't fall in this category, they still need to be on this list. So there's a separate, just procedurally, make sure I'm missing things. There's a separate filing cabinet that these files get placed into. So for example, Kendall's own employment records, while she does payroll, she doesn't have access to her files. It's a separate file, and it's just like I don't have keys. Susie doesn't have keys to those files either. Are there
We have keys like Elizabeth and I have keys to Kendall's file and Marcia's file and any conflicts of interest there. And then vice versa, we don't have keys where our files are conflicts of interest.
And that procedure, that document's now in the HR filing.
On page 2, under supervision, the new red line procedure, so grandfather clause establishes employees to work for family members directly when benefits of the district. Procedures will be in place if an instance occurs. What does that refer to? Is there a different policy? It's at the bottom there. It's procedures will be in place if an instance occurs. What procedures? I mean, should that refer to a different policy?
No, it's like, for example, if we have an employee who works in the department and what separations can be between that employee so that there's no direct supervision happening. And that has only occurred since before I got here, so we haven't had any instances that I can think of.
Are those procedures outlined anywhere? Because if you're referring
They are
to
not.
policy, shouldn't it be?
Well, you can have policies in this policy and then procedures like we have in our office. I would say it's not written or articulated, but we can do that. But it wouldn't go here because sometimes it can change on page. But that's a good, just like we did the procedure for procedural document for business office. We can do the same for those relationships.
Right, maybe just refer to whatever policy 1, 2, 3 or whatever you want to call it, but what the procedures will be followed if you have a family member supervising another family member or family members, how to make sure there's that degree of separation.
Yeah, we'll probably do just like that red line, the business office maintains a procedural document. We could say that the HR will maintain a procedural document if that was already established, you know, in our district.
Okay, and maybe we could see it since it's going to be part of this, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. Then we have GBK.
I think we all see how this would be impossible to do if we hadn't at least taken some look at this before we got here. Otherwise, it'd be here till midnight. So thank you for getting this information out in advance with the red line versions and comments.
So the grievance is defined as an alleged material violation of board approved district administrative policies or administrative regulations that apply to all employees. A complaint concerning unlawful discrimination or harassment may be filed in procedures A, C, AC, and AC. And I think just speaking, I think that's where some of our confusion has happened with the way some things have maybe been like shared. So it's been a confusion, not to get into some discussions that I think are very important for a later time. But AC policies, A policies are very different than G policies. And if those are confused or not because a person's not smart, they are confusing. So it's important for the individual to know which complaint form to fill out depending on the circumstance. Because if I file a complaint that Natalie was mean to me in the hallway because I took her parking spot earlier in the morning, that would fall under policy G. If she said, well, it's because I'm in a protected class, that would fall under policy A. And that real distinction between A and G are significantly different. And I think that's where we want to really work with our employees as well and ensuring so that we're following, making sure that they know what to use. And I'm looking at John, if there's anything you want to add there.
No, that summarizes it very well.
And then that would lead to my point, so that if they do go down the wrong path, that they're informed with care to follow this path instead.
Exactly. So this is where coming back, so, you know, we really need to fill out this form because it's not the right one for this situation. And that doesn't mean that you have to like relive everything. You don't have to relive it all, but because there is a reason so that you know which the individual knows which policy they're kind of falling under. And the person who's been accused of something equally.
Right.
Sorry. John.
There are state and federal agencies that are designed and are referenced within the A policies that are not referenced in this policy. So you want to point to those agencies that have the ability to hold the district accountable to its procedures and its investigation as well. So you don't want to circumvent those policies, those rules, those agencies in the name of following the G policy.
Let's see, under just the cross references, I see a place to add veteran status as well there. Okay, then GBKA. Recommend retiring GBKA. It's not in any policy that we've seen or any district. It says certified staff that would fall under our typical agreements policy. So this is where this policy stayed, that would be. And the next one is GBKA-R. I know that has brought up some questions.
So you're saying, I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm trying to keep up with, I'm not as fast on the computer's motion. So you're saying retired GBKA,
Yes.
that's just the one paragraph.
Yes.
Right, one, okay, fair enough, thank you.
Yeah, everyone who's mentioned there would fall under the GBKR process agreements. All right, so GBKA-R.
Is employee grievance procedure. Yeah, that one.
What's it titled?
Grievance, employee grievance procedure.
Okay. All right, so I think this can help bring some clarity just around the grievance, the grievant, and days, just so those are clearly defined. And then in step 1, identifying which form to complete for GBKA when there is not a non-discrimination or violation of a EEOC or a potential there. So really telling the individual, this is the form that you need to complete. And that form is, some folks might say, why the form? Why is that important? It's important so that when we get information, we're not having to make inferences and or read between lines or follow back up. And so it's pretty straightforward. And then it allows us to stay with a clear direction around what is the concern there. So it does follow in that process. I know the question comes out like, what if the superintendent is grieved? So there are a lot of different situations. What if Susie is grieved? And you remember, you can't grieve a person, you grieve a policy. So a policy violation, and that's a very clear distinction, and that a policy has been violated or potential there. So each situation is very different, and I just wanted to see if there's any questions that you all might have here.
No, it's actually quite similar to the old one, as you can tell by the lack of red lines, except the reference to that. I mean, there's a couple definitions and then a new form, which people, I look at the form, people can put a couple lines in there and then say, please see email that has, or please see attached letter that has all the details, which might be an easier form to kind of type on that form. So that seems pretty straightforward. And again, not all that is similar. Most of the actual process that change in the form could be filled out as far as step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Those are all, pretty much the same.
Yeah, and just when you go to GBKA-E, that form has a lot more clarity. But first of all, it didn't exist previously. And can allow someone to, what is the regulation or district policy being grieved, and explain the incident. And then describe your prior attempts to resolve this matter, and then describe the reasons why they're not satisfied with that. This is a grievance or this policy is very different than an EEOC policy A. To say, you know, I feel like this person, Natalie, keeps cutting me off in the parking lot because or she's mad at me in the hallway. And we've tried to resolve that. We've tried to do resolution, but now it's getting to be violent or it's getting to be aggressive. That can escalate these matters. So I think just having this forum can be very helpful for employees. Okay, I'll keep going.
I have a question, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
On the title of that, could you go back to that? I'm sorry.
So staff concerns, complaints, grievances.
Do you define, yeah, the very top, I'm sorry, that where it's entitled staff concerns, complaints, grievances. Is complaint, are those synonymous? Concerns, complaints, grievances, or should each?
For this particular matter,
So is that, because I can't read it from this distance, is that what grievance says? Is that concerns, complaint, is that those are synonymous terms?
in this particular, in our school district, right? And some, I would say employers council would actually recommend that we don't use the word grievance. They would say use it as a complaint under policy G. So I put that as a note. That was their feedback, that this should be considered.
Grievance tends to have a term of art to it,
Yes.
and complaint doesn't. Complaint is broader.
Yeah, it's really trying to be at the lowest level of problem solving. When a Title IX or Title VII violation has happened around discrimination, it really triggers something very different. So they recommend calling it a complaint resolution or problem solving in our own policy to have that distinction from A policies. There are districts that also use that as well. That would be a discussion for the board. But thanks, Don. I think that's where it gets confusing.
That's where, yeah, that's where they look to.
So you're suggesting that instead of using the word grievance at all,
Right, grievance in law, there's a term of art, right? And so it has a specific legal meaning, and complaint is much broader term. That because you referenced a parking lot incident. You know, I took my parking spot or something like that, maybe a complaint, but I don't know if it'd be a grievance from a term of art perspective. Unless you start looking at policies that are violated. So that's why, if that's what this is being used for, I would concur with employers.
So what do y'all think?
I like the idea, not only changing the word, but the approach, so that in that, to your point, Elizabeth, calling it a, what was it? Not the complaint, but
Call it a complaint resolution or problem solving.
or problem solving, is to really get in that mindset so that we do open up honest discourse, and we have this feel that if we have a problem, it's not, I'm gonna go attack this person, but I'm gonna be heard, they're gonna be heard, we're gonna learn different perspectives and resolve the issue. That's what we want. We don't want formalized things unless, as you mentioned, they need to be, which is Title IX and VII, those cases. So I would support that, and I would support the approach more than even the word, but the word matching that approach, I think is very appropriate, and I would support that.
So complaint resolution and problem solving, that would include grievance in that bucket, is that correct? So if somebody so it wasn't a parking lot issue, but it really was a concern about a violation of a board policy, that would still fall under this. Is that correct, John? You read it that way?
Right.
Then complaint resolution and problem solving is a bigger bucket than the grievance, which is a thin one. Okay, well then I'm
Yes.
fine with that too.
That's a really good way to summarize that.
I mean, so do we take out the top two? So we have to remove grievance and change it to complainant and change grievance to complaint throughout there.
It kind of shows up in all the Gs, so I think what I would recommend is let us take a re-stab at, a re-go at the language in all the policies with that, so maybe, is that
I
what
would
you
be
think?
comfortable, I mean,
Tina, Gary, what do you, are you tracking our grievance?
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Are you comfortable with the reworking of that language?
Yeah, I think the language makes sense. And then what Elizabeth explained about why we get detail at the beginning, because then that's the decision of, has a policy been violated? Is it a grievance? Is it a complaint? And John's addition to that differentiating.
Gary?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, change that. And also, again, with what John just said. So we got that differentiating class in there too.
One thing that we know is that because these words have so many different language meanings, and districts are in different places with their own structures. So CASB just puts out concern, complaint, grievances. They're not saying you use all three of those words, and I think that's where it's gotten confused in ours. And I saw it a couple different times, like words that are meant to just be used under a certain context. So if it's okay, we can just take a stab at or re-go at all of those policies.
And then, I mean, to Gus's point, I think you had a little more tweaking than just changing the word grievance. Correct?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's really included in here, but it kind of lends back to my comments on how these are, use the term enforced, but how they're followed. And so that we're changing the word to be softer in identifying resolution over this more formal, legal, stale, which can feel extremely, anyone involved in the court system, it's not fun. Even if you've done nothing wrong, you feel like you have. So if we can get to follow the wording, which is softer, to an approach that is also softer for resolution, I would support those two. I don't know if that's included in the policy or it's just the understanding of how to, quote unquote, enforce the policy or follow the policy.
But I think one thing we could, I don't think it's in the policy, but I do think it's part of the practice. So like maybe some check-ins with the individual. Right now, how are you doing? At the end of the process, what could we have done better if in the future there's a time? I can tell you tomorrow, our whole leadership team, 25 of us are going to be participating in something called True Speak. It's a 2-day training just around these topics of ensuring that we're handling these situations very well and how we treat people, but also that it doesn't go to this area. Like, right, that's the best case scenario, that you can problem solve way before, be on the same page, and here's the resolution there. So we're going to be doing 2-day training, all of our administrative team, and also our HR specialist. So and now it's going to attend as our continuous work. So she'll be board representative.
That's awesome. And that would also fall under trauma-informed care. That's what that is. So that group could also even take a gander at some of these to understand how to be, how to seek perspectives and avoid re-traumatization and all that kind of stuff. So very good.
You feel you have enough direction?
I do, yeah. So do you all want to approve this first reading or wait till you see the full edits? I think they're going to be enough language, like grievance is going to have to be worked out more so than this being approved as a first reading.
And can you put the edits, the newest edits, like in blue or green or some of the colors, not red or black, please? Just for those of us.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
Yeah, just the only thing I would be concerned with, because I like, things pretty rigid, and so if we do something, we know we're doing it right or wrong, and that the attorney has his input on this so we don't have to come back and redo this again and again, to make sure this is something that if we or someone that we need representation on this item, that he would be able to represent us without going, well, you guys shouldn't have done this. We should make it right the first time.
Sure. Are you talking about in the revision of these with the language, or just like
Yes.
action? Okay, got it.
Yes, just so the language is correct, that, this has been going on to where we get two or three people don't understand or misunderstand or that, whatever. But I just want to make sure that our representation from the legal side is totally good with everything that we put in there with any of the changes.
So before that July 11th meeting, I'll shoot these big changes back to John to review as well. Can I just ask from a, so I don't change it twice, do you all want to say complaint resolution or problem solving? Do you have a preference? She provided both of these.
Or both.
We could do both. Complaint resolution / problem solving.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
Did we do that? Oh,
Gary, Tina, do you have a preference?
Yeah, that would work.
did we do GDE? I missed it.
No, I don't think we did.
I didn't see much there, but just so at least it's everything we're up within the first read.
That staff, support staff recruiting that one.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got some pretty massive storm up here and I need to check for flooding really quickly. I'll be back.
Okay.
Never a dull moment. Fire system.
Are you talking about the GDE, GD?
Just GDE, I mean, it looks fine. I'm saying we should probably open it and look at it. So when we say we did a first reading, we did a first reading. That's all.
And
But
then,
no, I haven't seen any edits on that. So
Is that one, should we try to approve some of these or should we just do all of them at once for the whole section?
we can, well, and then GBL, that retaliation policy needs to be retired. Because that retaliation would fall under policy A.
I think based on what John just said, it absolutely wouldn't fall under policy. A policy is discrimination and retaliation is more of a behavior than a discriminatory thing. So I would say it would follow under, it may fall under the GBKs, but it certainly wouldn't follow under the A's because unless the retaliation is based on discrimination on a protected class, I don't think that would be a policy that we would retire unless we roll it into somehow into GBKAR.
The way this GBL is specifically written, it is around protected classes. That's where it's gotten hard for anyone to try to understand, but try to use our policy. This GBL is solely around protected classes. Or protected actions of a protected class.
Which is one we're retiring?
We're talking about retirement.
GBL, I'm recommending GBL, and that was based on John, Employers Council, John for sure, because this is where it's getting confusing.
It's not on the list. You have to look it up in our docs or you'll have your friend that knocked down a few trees today.
It's also in the notes section about policy review.
Oh, gotcha. So we don't need to do anything, we'll just disappear.
Yeah, obviously retiring it would require a vote, but I think it's different enough than discrimination. I mean, it talks about positive employee relations and morale, environment opposed to ongoing open communication to administration staff, faculty, students. You don't need to read the whole thing, candidate discussions. I mean, none of that has anything to do with discrimination or Title IX. Threats of retaliation constitute a serious violation of school board policy. I think we all believe that's true.
So, but that second paragraph is what is not appropriate here. That would go in policy page.
So the protected activity part and the EEOC reference, since EEOC is more based on discrimination, I could certainly see those coming out. An adverse employment action, suspension, demotion, or termination, that would probably stay in, because that could be part of retaliation or alleged retaliation.
That's under something protected under a protected class. So let's say, going back to this, Natalie files a complaint because she's in a protected class. it's that retaliation for her filing that complaint. That's what this is. This is all connected to that EEOC. So it's, I mean, the first paragraph, right? I mean, we don't allow retaliation, but this is where, when you look into this second paragraph too, or the third paragraph. And then that procedures part, the only part that would really kind of stay would be that first paragraph. We could kind of rework that.
So it's really the first paragraph in the procedures.
No, the procedures would go away because that's would fall under the complaint. That would fall under the complaint form.
I don't think we're going to retire tonight. Is that correct? Okay, so I guess we can.
I think for me, just editing, I'd like to just redline the rest of it, and then y'all can have a discussion around keeping that first paragraph. Because if you're going through the process of going ahead and talking through deviation or resolution, if there is a retaliation, it's going to fall frequently under policy A. But there could be some circumstances where, Natalie continues to harass me in the parking lot, and now she's posted something on Facebook about me or whatever. That does fall under, it would be continued part of that complaint process. And then, so we just have to be very clear, we're not mixing A and G. And that's what this does, this one as it's written. John, do you have anything you want to add to that? This is your recommendation to get rid of that.
Yeah, seems as if there's nothing in that policy that isn't handled by other policies. So it's duplicate.
But there's some specifics in GBL that aren't in either the old GBKAR or the new potential GBKAR. And again, I think we want, I mean, I think this, more for, obviously for the staff more than anything, but, we want them to be in a safe environment where they feel like they have due process. And I guess I disagree some, and John, I'd be open to your opinion. And I'm not sure. I think Elizabeth, you're right. Once it starts referring to the EOC, that basically gets you into the A policy. So I think there certainly is work that could be done to clean that up a bit. But retaliation, not based on any form of discrimination or protected activity, I think having a policy specifically on that, since we think it's such an important thing that our staff feel safe to speak up and not be concerned and things like that. I think it'd be important to have a policy on this, but I agree it does need to be cleaned up. You're absolutely correct.
Because retaliation in terms of illegal this is really around protected class, that you were offended, you were assaulted somehow, you've taken your statement around a policy A, and now you continue to be retaliated against. This is where the use of the word retaliation in different environments, it has a lot of different connotations. So I think I'll strip down after that first paragraph. But there are no other districts that have a GBL. Just, I think because it gets confusing when we start using this type of language that's associated with EEOCs.
I would agree. Having EEOC makes it confusing, and maybe somewhere in, as you rework it, that it says this has nothing to do with discrimination or protected class. That might clean it up some, and that kind of would take it more in the G group, in the G bucket, if you will, than in the A bucket. I think that would make sense.
Or would it make more sense to just define retaliation as a protected class, a retaliated group as a protected class? I mean, I'm also trying to figure out this. I mean, I don't want to send somebody here and then they're caught in a step cycle again of not being right.
Right.
Policy.
That's what you want to prevent, is that.
So someone retaliated against would be a new protected class. I just don't know that.
Well,
It'd be hard to define.
and that's why maybe it's not a separate policy when we rework these. Maybe there's a place on the form that actions you're submitting this form will not result in retaliation based on submitting this form, that complaint form. That's where you really want to make it about that form separate than the A form.
Back to the GKAR.
Which one do you?
GBKAR, I think. Is that the one that had the definition of complaint process, basically?
That's the one that had the definition of
Definition of
grievance
grievance.
stage.
Does that include,
Retaliation is not mentioned anywhere in there.
That's a great place though, like after notwithstanding, could say something like, an employee's submission of this. We have language in our letters already that says, Susie, could you pull up one of those letters, like what it says?
But that language doesn't say what you do if you're retaliated against. It says we won't retaliate, but it doesn't say what happens if somebody does retaliate.
Yeah, which fall back into this complaint process.
What letter?
GBKAR?
Like a HR letter that says at the end, you will not be. Yeah,
It
so.
says we take retaliation very seriously here and we promise you won't get retaliated against, something like that.
So if there's a complaint of retaliation that's not falling under A, it would come back to the completing this form. So I went through this process, and then after that, Natalie then started to do something publicly, and if you go back to this complaint form.
Right, so that's why I was wondering in the definition if there is or grievance or retaliated against by using this policy or something.
Right.
I feel comfortable adding it there, but I don't know if you all.
I think that some of the specifics under procedures, which actually does refer to GBKR, would be reasonable. I think the first paragraph up there sets the tone for the district and school board and basically all parties involved that we think retaliation is bad and detrimental. And then, I don't know if we need the last paragraph where it starts with an employee on GBL. And again, I don't know, we're mixing things and getting off on more than one topic. The last paragraph needs to remain in there so people know the process that may be different than the specific step process, which I recall we found somewhat confusing in the past.
That's the thing, it wouldn't be different. It would go back to that complaint form. Because if in fact, let's say the circumstance has been addressed, but then 2 weeks later finds out that there's some action of maybe allegations of retaliation, it stays in that complaint process. It's totally separate.
Retaliation is a type of discrimination.
Unless it goes up to a policy.
Well, I guess I'm just curious, because we don't make a statement that says, like, sexual harassment isn't tolerated by our school board. We don't, like, I'm just wondering, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think we should make a statement, but it should include all of the complaints and not,
Which could include, it'd be all inclusive of retaliation of.
yeah, like, we believe in a safe work environment, period, So I don't know, I mean, I guess that's where
As long as it's covered. in
I do
clear.
want retaliation to be retained somewhere, but in the appropriate place so that we're not
Yeah.
separating it out.
That's exactly, by having that GBL, it makes it extremely confusing for an individual. And it needs to be addressed with the situation. So if they submit the form, we think it's done, it's not done, there's some form of something else happens, you gotta go back to that. And if there's now a pattern that the individual there was some adverse reaction to them completing that form, or there was something else, then we can take action in there, but it would all stay in this complaint form process.
And in this last paragraph, where we're talking about who to go, where and when, you're saying that, is that in the complaint?
Yeah,
process?
that's why that GBL should just go away.
Yeah, but when are we gonna tell them who they need to go to? Because that's the last paragraph. And that's what we all had a problem with, because we didn't know where they should go, and should they go to someone who is, for lack of a better term that's coming to me, an underling of a superior, so we wouldn't have a subordinate investigating a superior. That was one of the concerns we had.
So with completing that, honestly, completing that form, it allows this to be clear, more clearly defined. So that form wasn't there, so there's lack of clarity, and this will help keep it in process and procedure.
Maybe if we just added this last paragraph on, from GBL to GBKAR, it would be clear so people know who to go with, because otherwise, I agree with Gus, step one was confusing. There, if somebody has if there's a grievance, which I know will be changed to complaint or whatever, if they have an issue, they go to their supervisor, which may not be the supervisor of the person that they have a complaint of retaliation about. And then you get into the point that Gus, and this is actually seems pretty straightforward to me, that you don't want to have somebody who is a subordinate to a supervisor investigating a supervisor. It just doesn't make sense. And so having this guidepost, if you will, to make it very clear and understandable who the person should go to is based not on who's making the complaint, but who the complaint or the allegation is about. Then if you put that in there, then it would probably be fine, because then you can call a complaint, that retaliation is a complaint that would fall into that big bucket. But I think you need to clearly define who they're supposed to complain to, and it's not based on the status of the person making the complaint. It's based on the status of the person the complaint is against.
GBKAR.
It's not, step one is not, step one says that the grievance goes to their supervisor.
It says,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, it says that it would go to the persons having direct administrative or supervisory responsibility over the work of the employee grievant involved in the grievance.
So the grievant is the person initiating the grievance, not the person who the grievance is against. So it should go against the person who the complaint is against. It should go to their supervisor. So if Gus is my supervisor, let me do it differently. If Natalie's my supervisor and Gus, so Natalie's two above me and Gus is one above me, and Gus is treating me bad and he's retaliating against me because whatever, for me to complain to Gus about his behavior isn't going to help when I need to go to his supervisor.
But that's what this is trying to do, is trying to keep it at the individual that's connected to circumstance. So that there is a paper trail, there is a documentation of, all right, we tried this, I tried to go to my supervisor. I tried to make that work and it didn't. So now I'm gonna have to go through the process because it wasn't addressed. So that is what we're trying to accomplish here, is that can things be resolved with the individual? And that might be hard. I'll just say, when I was a principal, there was an individual on the team that did grieve the superintendent, and it started with me as the individual's supervisor. So it didn't go straight beyond, the superintendent was grieved at the time, or the policy. It started with me as a principal with that teacher. And we went through the process, and I actually supported the teacher's belief about what happened. It was around like the salary adjustment. And then it went through the process. So it was to say, is this person going through this with looking through this lens? But that would be in partnership with others, just to make sure. But I understand the confusion. I think that it tells you who you're going through in this policy. But retaliation, so we can, I understand too, that this is not necessarily totally clear as it's written. So we can maybe add some portion of GBL underneath that, notwithstanding the steps. But I think it all needs to be in one policy so that people aren't going to 4 different documents. So under notwithstanding, I have retaliation is based on whatever language we have in our current letter, and then retaliation against any person. But to your point, it's we don't allow sexual harassment either.
So Gary, Tina, are you tracking where we're going with this conversation? Because I know you don't have GBL in front of you for retaliation.
Yeah, I'm not tracking every line. I'm tracking kind of conceptually what we're saying. I hear from everybody, we're trying to, as best as possible, mitigate past circumstances and be as conscientious of the grievant as the grievance, as well as the process. And I hear Elizabeth saying, you know, at the lowest level. So solving it right, you don't jump your supervisor. You try to resolve it at that level. Is that correct?
It is, except for in cases of discrimination and policy A. That's going to jump everything because we now violated a federal or a law around protected classes. So there is that distinction. And that's where that paragraph says, or who file a claim of discrimination. That is
Wouldn't I-
very different.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Wouldn't I have already gone to the individual? So we're saying, when you're talking there, I'm just wondering, wouldn't have already tried those avenues before filing a grievance?
I hope so.
So then, that's where I'm having, yeah, because I know, I'm trying to recall, I know that we all had a little funny taste in our mouth around that whole putting a subordinate in charge of resolving an issue when it's regarding their supervisor. And so that's the sticky part that I'd like to avoid.
So that's where I do believe that A, having that complaint form for harassment, having the complaint form for G policies around the policy violation will help make that not so muddy. It's super muddy right now. Really keeping it there.
Well, maybe if we can, so you guys are, I mean, you're gonna take another go through with the G policies anyway, right? And so part of that will be to look to consolidate maybe.
Yeah, GBL goes away and kind of folds in like that some part of retaliation under step number 4. Then at least capture, like by you doing this, you have the right to do this. It's not a problem doing this work. And anyone can do it, right? So I think we should add a couple of sentences.
And do we want to include some kind of statement from the board that says we do not tolerate
Sure.
these things and believe that everyone should be working
That'd be
in
awesome.
a safe environment? I mean,
That'd be great.
There's a place where I can't find it right this second, but there is a policy that says it might be G.
I think what made that whole thing different, what made it, from my recollection, what made it difficult to understand is under procedures for GBL, the sentence where it says allegations of retaliation will be investigated pursuant to the school district's grievance policy, GBKR. I think that's where it got confusing. If that line wasn't there, we would have had a very clear pathway on where to go that would have been entirely black and white without really any form of discussion or interpretation.
Can you say that again, Jack?
So what makes it, in my opinion, under procedures for GBL, the part where we got confused, and this is, I guess you're right, the EOC part is certainly confusing in the second paragraph, and probably should not be there, I agree with that. But allegations of retaliation under procedures will be investigated pursuant to the school district's grievance policy, GBKR. That's where it got confusing because there's one very clearly laid out black and white policy, really no interpretation necessary under procedures in GBL with who the employee goes to. But then you go to GBKR and it says something totally different.
And that's why GBL is really retaliation on the grounds of protected classes. It should not be there. It should be in, not to say that any other retaliation is okay, but it's in the wrong place. That's the content around it is in the wrong place as well.
But do we all agree that retaliation can be against somebody who's not in a protected class?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the policy that we need to have. And again, if we just put the last paragraph and tag it on the GBKAR, that would probably solve the issue, and then GBL could go away. It's just we need to have a guidepost for people to go, because if you're retaliated against, it means you've already spoken up once, and you've been retaliated against, or believe you've been retaliated against. For one, that really discourages any sort of free flow of information and discussion, and the whole embracing divergent opinions that we have on our agreements. And where do you go to have that resolved, or do you just be quiet and not say anything? And I think that's what we want to avoid, to Natalie's point, that as a board, we really don't want to tolerate any bad behavior in the district. We know there may be some, but we would really want to strongly say that we don't encourage it. And I think that retaliation for a non-protected class is still a concern. That's probably why it's in many of your HR letters.
Yeah, we have some language that we can put, it's not a problem, but one thing I do want to add is if you look at GBK, Natalie, to your point around the board, it is the board's desire that procedures for setting differences provide for prompt and equitable resolution at the lowest possible administrative level, and that each employee be assured an opportunity for orderly presentation and review without fear of reprisal. So that retaliation is right there. So we've always had that there. So I don't see if there's another spot for it.
I just know what happens when you're retaliated against. It says we won't tolerate retaliation, but if it happens, what happens next?
It goes to the complaint process.
Which doesn't have the correct steps in, depending on who the person is being complained about.
Okay, John.
Well, the retaliation is for a protected, is of a protected action. So if you've filed a complaint, policy AAC, and you feel that there's retaliation, not only would you bring it up within that process, if it later comes up, it goes back to the AC. Because that's the protected. You're protected you are protected to file a complaint under AC, and you are not to be retaliated against because you did, even if the outcome is something different than what you allege. It's your action to file under A and file under G. Your actions are protected itself, regardless of whether or not there was a retaliation there, or excuse me, whether there was a discrimination or other actions there, your action to file there is protected. And that's so you push it back through that process as a protected activity, regardless of your class. So you're filing under AC, that action to file under that is a protected action. And you're not to be retaliated on that, even if later it comes out that it was false or whatever, it didn't come out whichever way. You are protected there.
So under G, if you file G, that without fear of reprisal is there.
And that's what's said in each of the policies is you are protected here and any retaliation is prohibited. And you're to report it if it comes up. That's you can see that in AC. You can see that in Title 9. You can see that in your policies. So that you file there and that you filed is a protected action.
Yeah, you could say without fear of reprisal or retaliation.
But then what happens when you're retaliated against and it has nothing to do with A? I mean, again, it seems so simple to me.
It stays in G.
And it should stay in G. We just need a guidepost for people to go. So a teacher speaks up at a meeting and says something that is in a different district. It is not well received by the principal. And then the principal does something negative to affect the teacher, gives them a smaller classroom, whatever it is. So that would be a complaint. That would be a retaliation, potentially an allegation of retaliation. So does the teacher then go to the assistant principal, who's then going to investigate the principal, who is the alleged retaliator? That just doesn't make sense. So my kids could figure this out.
But you said in that case, the principal did something and
Correct.
they filed a complaint. Did they file a complaint?
Teacher filed a complaint.
The teacher is alleging retaliation because the principal moved them into a closet instead of a classroom with big windows.
But it would have had to been because something else happened before that.
Because he spoke up at the meeting, because she spoke up at the meeting in a school district in New Mexico, and it embarrassed the principal, or it's contradicted what he or she was saying.
So was that original issue addressed to a complaint? Because if it wasn't.
Well, they file a complaint, but if the complaint is retaliation.
So maybe that would be your first complaint.
Yeah, there's another party that's protected and that's the person who's accused.
Yeah.
So the person who's accused, you did this to me because it's the person who's accused also has protection in terms of what facts are you talking about here?
That's
You
what,
said something in this meeting or whatever, while I was just giving you your assignment or whatever. So it's that person. So there's two parties here. And that's what you're looking out for versus simply an allegation.
yeah, so in that case, principal spoke out, and then this person would complete the form that says, you know, I think it was a violation of this policy, that after this spoke out, then I had a smaller class. They would address it there. The retaliation would come after this person has filed this complaint form and there's resolution. Not, that would be the initial complaint would be, all right, there was adverse reaction. I spoke up in a staff meeting and then the individual was mad at me for that. You have to address that initial behavior first at the lowest level versus, like you said.
And that's what the form does.
Yeah.
The form says, what is the incident, right?
Right.
There's facts there. There's alleged facts that are there. This happened. This is how I'm explaining it and so on and so forth. That gives the basis of the investigation that you want to have a record of to base a finding on.
Right, so I guess we'll see, because we could talk about this for another 2 or 3 hours, and I think we're all getting tired. So maybe we can look at what you come back with the revision, if you can get that out well before the meeting like you have in the past, which is very helpful. And we can try to move forward, but I'm trying to separate retaliation from the A as far as the east is from the west.
Natalie,
Yes.
I only want to give my 2 cents worth on this issue. I think number one, I hopefully, because we're never going to resolve this thing tonight, but it seems to me that once we get these GBA and all the policies in place, that is there going to be somewhere, maybe we sit down in small groups, or you sit down, the superintendent does, or however they want to do it, with small groups of the teachers, and explain this to them, the process of what they have to do, because you know what's in really happening is that it appears to me that whatever anybody does, now we're opening the door to where everybody's going to bring everything to the board. And I don't think we have time for that. I know I don't have time for that. But maybe if there was a training, an understanding between the staff of how these things work, what the process, and then we should never really hear anything at all, because it should be handled administratively.
No, I think that's good. We can go back at these policies, use that language, build in some of the dialogue that I just heard, and then it could be some good board work too, to maybe role play some scenarios and walk through like when this would be used versus when this would be used, what happens if it's this situation, so we could kind of play out some scenarios.
Yeah, I echo the role playing idea, because that will bring forth problems. And to Gary's point, of course, we don't want first thing for people to do is come aboard, but we want that option available when it's necessary. So we don't want the position or the messaging to be that they don't have an avenue. And so that's is my point there. And I do think the role playing would help everyone see, because I think John was defining retaliation as the process of filing a complaint, where Jack was talking about a teacher saying the very complaint itself is retaliation. So they're two separate definitions, and we'll address those next time when we go over the process.
But like in the cutting off Natalie in the parking lot, if I didn't address it the first time, I thought that her behavior was unsafe. That should have been the first complaint. Natalie's driving unsafe in the parking lot. Can we address that? So then it is documented, right? What have we done? But I think this is great.
And I think it is important to understand what retaliation is, because it is the protected activity of retaliation is for a protected action. You're protected if you file a complaint under Title IX. Your filing is a protected action And you can't be retaliated against based on that. And that's usually in the Title IX responses and the Title IX policies, and I believe it is in AC.
Yes.
It's that's retaliation versus, I don't know, the reason he did this is he doesn't like me. I mean, that may or may not be true, but that isn't retaliation as a protected activity. That's a because. He did this because. That's a cause effect, which is distinct from retaliation.
Okay, we'll look at those.
So we've got,
Yeah.
So nothing actionable, that's fine.
Still have J, are you all up for J? I don't think it'll be as hard. JB. That's just a boilerplate from Casby. It's all around students.
That seems pretty straightforward.
And it matches A, which is important, so then those references, if there's ever any change to A, they gotta make sure we change B. JBA can be retired and replaced with JBB. There's also a new policy.
I'm sure Elizabeth, you said JB.
Yes, JBA will replace JBB.
Okay.
So you all know too, this connects to some of the OCR audit that Colleen has been working through for the last year and a half, 2 years, 3 years. This pushes all of this into a policy. And then we have JBAA, needs to be retired as well. And it gets folded into JBB. And then the last one, JH, is just, needs to be retitled, nothing major.
So JB AA is not in the packet. Is that right?
Right, it'll be
But
just,
JBB totally replaces it.
yeah, JBA and JBAA will become JBB.
do I have a motion to accept the first reading policy of JB, JBB, and JH?
Let's clarify, and then I have to make a motion. So we're just approving the first reading of these three policies because I haven't looked at JBA or JBAA. So we're not saying getting rid of those, we're just approving the first reading of these. We don't need two readings to remove a policy. Is that correct?
You can't remove until it's a second reading, or?
We would remove it after you approve the second.
That gives us time to read it. So I move approval of the first reading of JB, JBB, and JH. Second.
Any discussion, Gary, Tina?
No, we can go to a vote.
Johnson. Hi. Moen.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Vidovich.
Aye.
Okay, are we good on policies at the moment? Okay, awesome, thank you guys, that was a lot. Okay, district attorney present.
Please say district's attorney.
District's attorney. President of board meetings. I mean, we spent some time discussing this at the last meeting. I don't know what your schedule's like, but I think it was helpful to have you here today. With,
I think it's helpful. I'm hoping maybe one of the things, under the board retreat is just kind of a year in review of kind of our legal, legal history, just so we have a good understanding of where we've been and kind of where we're going, and we can learn from that. So it'd be nice to add, a year in review legal style, if we can do that. But no, I think it's helpful when we have questions that aren't clear.
I agree, it's helpful. So my only concerns would be around the investment and the availability of John and all of that. I think having them here is always nice when it comes up. Now, there could be meetings when John's sleeping in the corner. And so my thought originally was that, you know, we batch legal questions and such that we can bring John in for those and kind of knock them all out. But open to discussion.
I don't know if we actually even need to take action on this. I think if you all in the meeting before see what's coming up, say this would be one where we do want John to be there. That's another way it can happen, as long as I think as we're looking at these GBJ policies that's going to be for at least the next 3 months. I would say that he should be here for those.
Maybe for some time during the retreat.
Hey, to that point, this is something that I was thinking about earlier, where we talk about agenda setting, and since, you know, work session to the regular meeting, can we make like formal part of the meeting be to kind of poll the board for, because I think sometimes it comes and goes and we don't, and I don't think of, oh, I would like, you know, I don't think to promote something I would like to see on the agenda. So maybe to have that be part of the meeting, the work session, to pull the board anything for the upcoming meeting you'd like to see on the agenda. That might also address, you know, where in between those meetings where we have the emails and the issues that we're talking about, to really have that be a formal part of the meeting.
Yeah, and I would just ask that as much as looking at that planning agenda, so like if it's coming, we know what's coming in the future. But if there is something that all of the board members say, yes, we want to bring this next, just being aware of what else we're already prepared for. But I think Tina has kind of sometimes put that under the board self-reflection for the next meeting, so that's a place.
I mean, so, because I guess like city council, we do council correspondence, and we all kind of go around the room and even like name and say like, hey, we have doing mindfulness finger painting, let them go. But that's also an opportunity to say, hey, I would like to potentially discuss this in a meeting, and then again, we can take that vote in that moment. And so maybe that is that like a version of self-reflection that is a little less internal and more maybe external.
Yeah, I like it, because then we can collaborate and maybe one idea turns into something different. And then we say, oh, we might need John for that. So then in that point, we can say, hey, can we plan on what we arrived at for the agenda item, and then bring in John if necessary, and those types of planning things. I just, I've had those times when I thought of really what I may want to put on the agenda for the regular meeting.
So that's where, like, timing wise, especially if we go back to 2 meetings a month, that's real important to know, because that's a quick turnaround from work session to regular meeting. So we almost have to know a little bit further out. If it's something that doesn't require a significant amount of time, but if it's a whole nother change, we just need to make sure that our team has time. So I think I can give you, yeah, with that. I mean,
That's what we were talking about earlier, right? With Tina was, like, tonight would be too quick because we're in work session, and then like that, we're in regular meeting. But are you saying then that 2 weeks is also too short for most of that, or is that appropriate for agenda setting?
it just depends on what the ask is, I think.
Probably is.
But y'all been good about saying, is that reasonable amount of time?
Yeah, and that's all good. For me, it's just kind of a prompt. And maybe this, I like the external, as you put it, to have discussion, because someone else's idea might spur one from me, or they might combine, or whatever. So that sounds good.
Are you comfortable with that, Gary and Tina?
Sorry, yes, had to find my unmute. Yes, I think, again, the more things get high level of discussion and robust and different ideas and of greater importance, I think the more we need to articulate our process.
I think you're right. Yeah, we gotta be careful. Use this to get movies.
So then, I don't know if they'll need to take action with attorney, maybe.
We generally don't take action to have him, meaning Mr. Stanek, at meetings. We just say, do we?
I like it required, yeah, let's go. Okay, good. All right.
Only caution would be executive session for certain things. I have to stay as best as I can, very broad in public sessions.
But are you available on July 11th?
July 10th?
July 11th? I think we're probably gonna have an executive.
I think I'm gonna be out of town on the 11th. I know I am.
Okay.
Moving my son to Texas. So
Well, I have us on the 18th. And then the 18th, I've got our board retreat on the 11th, but then I also have this on the 18th. We'll just do that. Let's see. I don't have anything on the 18th.
On the 11th right now is all we have scheduled.
Okay, all right, we'll figure out a plan for next month. Okay. Planning agenda, I don't know how much time you want to spend on this tonight, but
It's pretty straightforward from last year and no changes. So,
That's really all kind of sterile boilerplate sort of stuff, I think, so.
and we've made changes like for this year. I think it's worked well with the in statements when they're presented.
yeah, that was a little crazy. We didn't have the data.
thinking aloud again, just on the 11th, although I'll be out of town, I could attend by virtual.
Was the 11th the only day we could meet? I mean, if John's going to attend and we have some pretty meaty topics to discuss, as somebody who's attending virtual right now, I think it would be beneficial to have him in person.
Oh, okay.
About the 18th for the retreat, just move it all to the 18th.
That works for me.
For you around, Tom?
The 18th, yes.
We do that?
I'm not a fan of more meetings, but I just wondered, do we do some sort of work session?
We'd be moving the whole.
No, what I'm saying, I'm actually suggesting adding another meeting.
Oh,
Which makes me a little sad that I'm speaking coming out of my mouth, but we try to do a work session or something on the 11th, so we can make sure that our time on that, and maybe, and try to limit it, like set a timer that it's an hour or it's 90 minutes. So that we can maybe have the retreat. I can do the 18th, by the way, to answer your question. Maybe just the 18th is enough.
July.
So yes, I can do the 18th. If we don't need more prep, I just like to make sure that we're prepped and ready, so the 11th, that there's, not a ton of not useful time spent, because that's a pretty big investment for everybody during the middle of July in Colorado.
Well, it's also like our start of the school year is right around the corner. So my preference is that we did it all in one day. So it's one big prep for our administrative team. So
That sounds great to get all the stuff prepped before we get the material out that we want to look at, which might include using some sort of repository of documents so the board members can review them before the meeting. So we need to figure out how to do that. Do we need to have a board vote to make that happen, or do we just use a resource? Because there's going to be stuff to talk about at that meeting that's going to need board members reviewing it before the meeting, unless we're going to spend time at the meeting reading.
typically anything that's attorney-client privilege, you would read during the executive session. I'm looking at John. We don't get it before that.
I think you're thinking more generally. like-
Yeah, I think actually everything.
Yeah, and adding an agenda item to our board retreat or asking for additional information for the retreat
I
itself.
think everything's been out in public or has been reviewed in emails based on a core request, which would make it public automatically.
No, not, they've made it public, but it's not public by the board to discuss publicly.
If
I would
it's-
feel uncomfortable.
Well, I'm saying that's what I think that was the impression I got from the CASB attorney when I asked him.
Yeah, but that's to the person who's requested it. It's public for them, not for everyone else. Are you talking about the employees speaking or the clerk?
Correct, because we had specific employees mentioned in the core request that Mr. Weimer put forward last month.
Yeah, I'm not at all comfortable discussing.
Do you have thoughts on that? I'm just trying to find the. email from the CASB attorney.
So your question though is specific to
Oh, we need to,
executive session, not to.
Because there's some-
the retreat, okay.
there's letters from, staff to the board that are going to be part of the discussion. Everybody's got those, so everybody could just look at their own email. I could just say, look at emails. I guess I could do that.
I would, I don't know, Tina and Elizabeth, like, I would say that anything you would like included in the packet of the executive session, you would send to Elizabeth to include in the packet.
But then people wouldn't be able to review it beforehand.
Well, it's gonna be in our board packet,
So it'll be sent out beforehand. Okay,
and then we're all looking at all this.
Yeah,
other things,
that's great.
right? I mean, that's.
okay, sure.
If there's something that I feel like is not, like you send it to me, and kind of like, this is gonna be confidential, that I wouldn't then share out, we can work through that. Because I think it's very tricky, anytime you email it.
Content,
What's that?
administrative content of board docs, so that it's not being sent via email.
Oh, that's a good idea. Board Docs is great. That was good. You got it. Or the good, you and two together. It's a good investment.
So if you want to plan for the 18th, so that's going to be a lot, retreat, work session, regular meeting, and executive session.
Natalie,
Yes,
doesn't, and I don't feel comfortable with this at all, even though it isn't a core request, and there was, I guess, some things in the emails that suggested that, but it doesn't appear to me that I would want my name or anybody else's brought out unless, they were advised previous that you're going to do this, and that it would be at their discretion to have an executive or not, because I just don't feel good with this at all.
okay. Okay, so. Okay, I guess Tina, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'm listening and I think, Gary, you're talking about individuals and their thoughts on it. I guess my thought is that we would be speaking less about individuals and more about big picture process and policies and the application of those process and policies. Is that correct? The rest of the board, am I misstating
That was
that?
my take, was that we might have to mention someone's name as part of a demonstration of what we don't want to happen again, like that's why it has to be executive session, but that the session would actually be about how have we violated policies? What can we do to fix this? How do we get on the same page? That kind of thing.
Right. It's about us as a board, as members, as well as the collective, and how we're interpreting, how we're moving forward, how we're dealing with things, how we're dealing with our internal conflicts and then external conflicts. And, I think we probably need to explore a lot of different topics as well as policy associated with this. So I don't see it as us speaking about, again, individuals. I think, again, we're keeping it at a high theoretical level because it's kind of, we can talk about these specific instances as learning experiences and what we maybe could have done differently, should have done differently, however we want to phrase that. But then what do we agree then to move forward? I mean, again, please let me know if I'm misspeaking or have the wrong thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Gary.
I was just going to say, if we're going to just, theoretically state a situation and things, but, if we're going to leave individuals out of it, because if it was me and you guys want to speak about me and I'm not there and I haven't had any, notice or anything about that, I'm not going to be happy. And, there may have been some emails and stuff like that sent, which, whatever's happened. But right now, I think as a board, if we do it as a generic way, I'm okay with that. But first time we start bringing up somebody's name, I'm going to stop it.
Well, if there's somebody's name involved, I wonder if we should consider inviting them. And then they can be part of executive session.
Except my concern with that is then it makes it a personnel issue and it makes it about the individual. and it's not. It's policy. And so I think we can pretty easily refrain from using names even, and just talk about the particular situation in general and really focus on the policy and procedures.
We can redact the staff member's name and emails.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a really good idea, because again, I know for people, it feels like it's about them, but it really is about our processes as a board, our policy, our decision-making. That, again, that's my perspective. If you have a different one, this would be a great time to talk about it.
But then,
Anything that was submitted by an employee should not be brought up in any public meeting. It has to go through executive session, and then that executive session would have to be, if that employee wanted it to be executive session in public. But these matters, my understanding is it's still at all administrative. And so this is where in the role play, the retreat, you'd have to give a different scenario to kind of role play the situation. It'd have to be totally unrelated to any current employment circumstance. So that could be something that can be role played going through this policy. It's hypothetical. It's not connected to anyone, but we cannot bring in the discussion with, we would violate every employment law. I can't even imagine.
it's a lot of employment laws. But that's a lot of employment laws. Our board actions or individual members of the board actions affect staff members. So I think it's impossible to separate those. I think it is probably two different.
Has it? And that's the question. Has an action actually affected
Yes.
that? We don't know that. We don't know that yet. So we have to role play and go through these scenarios, going through the policy, because
But we're also.
I understand what you're saying. I also understand, like earlier today, you basically said the board is actively violating its policy.
I'm concerned that, and so
And
is the
so-
community.
I don't know how to talk through that.
but not the community. I'd say there were folks from the community, but the community means to me 100%.
Folks from the community, I would go with that. People that spoke up in public comment, that's going to be in the public record, that we all heard that they spoke out about their concerns, making it public. But I'm okay offering them executive session or offering the one-person executive session. I'm fine with that if that's what they'd like. I didn't necessarily get that from the letter, that the letter is multiple, that appeals to the multiple appeals to the board, that the board has not even entertained hearing. That's my concern.
It does, I think it goes to Gary's conversation earlier. This is based on the advisement of our general counsel. And so you have to make sure that you stay in policy and advisement of the attorney.
But isn't part of policy understanding how to apply the policy, and we have to look at how we apply the policy, and if we have different opinions on how the policy was applied, those need to be discussed. And we can discuss those without naming people, but I think we as a board need to discuss how we have applied our policies so we better understand them and make appropriate changes and improve for the future.
So then that would be advisement. It would be advisement from attorney under executive session without talking about the employee or the circumstance. You'd have to have a sort of hypothetical, because now you're getting advisement from attorney, and that should happen in executive session with absent of an employee.
And it would not be a person that would, the reason for executive sessions are enumerated. There's a limited number. So one is legal advice. The other would be personnel matters. This would not be a personnel matter.
I don't think so. To me, it's not.
But how that meeting goes may result in a different approach to a personal matter,
Potentially, or not.
which has a time frame to it, which we've already has been exploded.
We haven't. It is all state and administrative, so nothing has.
Right, so this will be a board discussion because the deal is to the board.
But I don't know how to have that.
I guess
I don't know how to
that's,
have this conversation without.
that's the executive session, that's fine. I mean, as long as we're saying, because it may not actually fully be, the entire conversation will not be you giving us advice. And the presence of an attorney does not necessarily dictate an exact reason for an executive session. So if we're gonna really follow our policy and actually follow state law, it's not even a policy, I mean, it's our policy, but it's state law, there's 8 or 9 specific reasons for having an executive session.
Correct.
So I think there's, you know, I don't, that's not really my opinion, but, you know, we need to figure that out, but I think we need to figure out, you know, roles and responsibilities, which we already talked about, and limitations on that. And then we have to look at, you know, when somebody appeals to the board, how is that responded to by the board?
It also exists, what I hear is this, when there's, I don't know, I wouldn't call it disagreement, but when there is question on board policy, who has kind of like the final say? And it's team. In policy, the board president is the final voice of the board for purposes of adherence to policy. So that's kind of a way to, you know, organize yourselves in terms of what does the policy mean and what is it, how do we implement it, as well as in your policy. In the executive limitations, you grant the authority to abide by policy to your superintendent. So there is a discretion in that where you yield your judgment to her by policy. And it's to avoid this. Well, I disagree or whatever, right? It's like, well, okay, but still you've granted it by policy to an executive. Why? Because it's her job to implement the policies. And if she isn't, then that comes into her evaluation. That's the way it works. Versus constantly chatter about how much I disagree with someone else's interpretation of someone else's interpretation of something.
So we'll talk about BDB, because I don't see that, John, in our policy BDB with regard to board officers. We don't need to talk about it.
It wouldn't be board officers. I think it's executive limitations, and I think it's executive limitation.
The board president is the parliamentarian.
The board president is, it is in B policies where there's the board president is kind of the, call it the chief, right?
Well, there's 11 things there. So anyway, I'm not getting into that now because this will be great fodder, and we can all prepare for it because it's in our board docs. I don't need to send it out.
You want to be looking there.
Pardon me?
You want to be looking there.
In BDB.
I believe so. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe so.
And I think too, you bring up some important things that have to be talked about when we're talking about how information is received from the board, or to the board. Some of the emails that have gone, you know, I also have participated in this forum and to see some communications. And so when we think about how information is being shared by board members, it's quite important. And also when there may be some conflicts of interest, and how is that going to be addressed? And that has to be addressed before the executive session. It has to be, in my opinion, addressed in a public setting around any of those matters. So John, I don't know if you want to speak to that part.
Yeah, there isn't, as you said, there's a limited numbers, enumerated number of reasons to go in executive session, talking about policies.
Conflict of interest would not be in that case, or it could be potentially.
Probably not. Conflict of interest would be a public discussion.
That would happen.
I guess there'll be any more core requests. Sorry. Must be taking a lot of your time.
No. Okay, so I do feel like there's more to discuss, but let's see, where are we? Work session minutes. We did agree to, I guess we just need the language of what we need to say to.
So
What are we doing on the board calendar about that?
did we not approve? We should approve that. I move approval of the board calendar is submitted.
Oh, did you want to do that?
Second.
Let's make a second.
Okay, a vote. Johnson.
Aye.
Moen.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Vidovich.
Aye.
Okay, sorry about that. And now we're to work session minutes. We discussed this during our work session. And you had suggested that we move the work session minutes to the, what was the language of where it's falling to the next meeting?
Can we give them discretion and just say the work session minutes and the public comments go to the place that's most convenient and easiest for the board secretary and the IT department to place them in board minutes or board docs where they're accessible to the public?
I think what's easiest is that we do not move anything from work session, like everything that's been posted where it is. To go back 2 years is not easy. So if that's the case, what's easiest is that everything that's already happened stays where it is. That's clean. It's core, it's public information. It's just where it lies. So if anyone wanted, they could get the information. So that would be the easiest on that. That's a lot of.
To do it moving forward.
Or yes, start
Here forward.
But if the board wants those moved, we can do that. It's just, it does take a few times.
Well, I'm okay with empowering you all to do whatever makes sense, as Jack.
And then public comments would come out of administrative content and go into some sort of
Yeah.
public accessible place in board docs tied to the meeting where the
Yeah.
comments were made, probably, or whatever's easier for you guys.
Yeah, like the ones tonight will go on public comment for next month's regular meeting as a place.
Okay, so basically it's kind of like with the minutes or something like that. Not in the minutes, but with the minutes or some, okay, sounds great. Whatever's easier for you guys.
Okay, so I'll second that, but then Tina, Gary, do you have any input? Or just empowering staff to do what's best for the work session minutes and the public comment?
Okay, so I heard, do I have any more thoughts or comments on how staff can be more engaged with the minutes? Is that, or more accessible to them?
Just where they're gonna land so that the public can find them.
I mean, the districts that I'm in, I like work in, it's usually on board docs printed and you just access it for the meetings. I mean, I guess I assume that's where ours is as well.
Yes, but we'll make work session public.
Make it work session.
Yeah,
public.
right now the work session isn't public.
It's an administrative, but in the future meetings, we'll make work session public.
Well, I remember from the beginning, what did we say costs the least, but is also accessible?
That was the motion, basically.
Right, okay, yep, then I'm good with that. I didn't know if we needed to have a red neon button saying work session minutes that you press and takes you to it.
And that was, Gus, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Gary, do you have any feedback?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that because I think those are working documents and the minutes are, I mean, our minutes are discussion. We're trying to move forward with some things, but those are going to be topics for your next meeting. So either way, I'm just going to voice my opinion that I don't think it's necessary and we don't need to necessarily make more work for our staff as we already do that every day.
Thank you, Gary.
So I made a motion. Is there a second?
I second it.
You second, thank you.
Johnson.
Aye.
Moen.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Vidovich.
Aye.
Okay, legislative updates.
I mentioned one earlier, just around Senate Bill 70, so we're just diving into that. It was just approved around the evaluation system, so it's going to be some flexibility that school districts have, but we would take a lot of time to go there. There is clean water in schools, lead in schools. It's going to be quite expensive for us, and we don't have the specifics of how That's going to be rolled out. So we think about the impact financially to the school district. We don't know what that is yet, so just I'll keep you all posted. But everything else, there are things we've been talking about here. This just reduce justice involvement for young children. Let's move forward just to ensure that students are not getting criminal charges early on in their childhood education experiences. So just wanted to post those for you all. But Senate Bill 70 is going to be a big one for us.
All right, board self-reflection. Anyone have anything to reflect on?
Natalie, I have one thing.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, because it was brought up, and of course, everyone got the email that I was the only one that didn't respond to that group. And I don't plan to either, because I feel that we independently go out and reach out to these groups, and we have 5 or 4 different opinions, and they come back with 4 different ideas or thoughts of what's going to move forward. So I think from now on, and it's my opinion only, I'm only one board member, that if we were going to do this, we need to do it as a board, because we're one voice, not 5. And I feel that that's the way it should be. And that's where I'm going to stand with this. So I'm going to be the one, and it's true. I haven't reached out to him, and I'm not going to.
Thank you, Gary. I know I respect your desire to do that. It might be something to discuss. Again, we're just going to be discussing how we communicate with the public so much at our next board retreat. And I think this is another great example of something we need to discuss. So.
For sure, and I do think there are instances where not all 5 of us can be there, especially with some of the designs of these community engagement processes. I don't know that are going to be feasible for all 5 or even necessary, but my reflection kind of is in general. We do have different opinions. We've had a lot of comments, in the last couple of months with different viewpoints, and it reminds me of a class that I'm in, and within our class, we have all these people working on this compassion inquiry. And we had individuals who are working together, we're investigating the depths of us. And in those processes, people can get in conflict. And through the conflict, what came out was the leader of this group investigated this conflict of 2 individuals. What they found is each individual thought the other individual was the aggressor, was the one on the attack. So keeping that in mind, that each side had that viewpoint. And so what I just want all of us to keep in mind when we have differing opinions and differing ideas is to work on not feeling attacked, which is very hard to do, especially when we have our history. We all have our histories and our triggers. And so it's important to look at, number one, what are our own visceral reactions? How familiar is this to ourselves? What might be happening for the other person? And that's very key to look at, because what might be happening for them is they're feeling attacked, when what's happening for ourselves is we're the ones that feel attacked. So what we can work towards is to really put ourselves in the other's position and drop our guard and defense and really get curious about what people are bringing to the table. And it doesn't have to be 100%. We have people that feel threatened or concerned, we should look into it. It doesn't mean that we are threatening or attacking them, but it means they have that perception and we should look into it. And work together in a non-defensive way to find the best outcomes. And we had some comments around that love and support and creating that community. And when we feel isolated, we lash out. And so really to work towards connecting with each other, working together for the best outcomes of all of us. That's my reflection.
I'm glad you brought up the love and support, because I did want to mention Colleen's statement earlier that at our board retreat, if it's possible to discuss how we can support this district and staff going through a trial in a very public way in these next 2 months and what that means for all these folks. And that's a big deal. So I don't know what we can do, but I think that, I don't know, attempting, trying, talking it through is a big deal. So.
And I appreciate that.
I don't know, Mr. Bob, Natalie, but you have no idea what that statement just meant to a whole lot of people. And it's, I hate to say it's about time, but thank you.
So I guess it can do better.
We have some serious things that are right around the corner. They're here, and it's a big deal. And my hope is that the amount of attention that we've given to policy can be applied to healing our community that's really been hurt and hurt in different ways. This is important.
Tina, Carrie, do you have anything to add?
Not for me.
No, I don't. I look forward to our next meeting and knowing that we have the board retreat. I don't know that we have anything scheduled between now and the board retreat, and we're going to have to approve a budget at the end of the month, or help me under, do we
You
need?
approved it tonight.
Okay, so we're good to go, because I know in past years we've had to meet at the end. So we're good to go to not meet until the 11th or the 11th of July?
Yeah, the BOCES is that date on the 28th is for that BOCES agenda, a BOCES board.
I'm just double checking that, and that is correct. We are not meeting again until July 11th. I guess I'm just lifting that up as, you know, thinking ahead in the calendar. Jack mentioned July is pretty busy, and just so we're all cognizant of that, if that's the case.
And I think we were going to move it to the 18th. Is that right?
Yes.
Does that work for you?
So we think from 11 to, I mean, we had like a little mini retreat today, almost 4 hours.
In my mind, I just wonder if we actually need a work session, if it could be retreat, regular meeting, executive session. Is that okay?
So would that start early then? Would we start our board meeting at 5 instead of 6, or?
Think about if we went from, so it says 11 to 3:30. Maybe you just need 30 minutes in between. So 4 to 5 for the regular meeting. Or 5:30, how about that? 4 to 5:30? And then the executive session after that.
Or do we want to move the whole, well, that's fine. I mean, I'm just concerned that if we start earlier, we're just going to fill the void of time and still go to 8:41.
And the
I think
retreats
maybe
first.
when we build the agenda, in the, you know, vein of efficiency, that maybe we allot some time as to our agenda. We normally, I know we do that sometimes, but we maybe need to agree for a norm or a working agreement that day that we're going to try and stay really tight and concise to those times, so we don't end up going later into the evening and maybe our attention and focus waning.
We could shoot from 11, we could go from 11:30 to 3 for the retreat, and then 3:30 to 5, and then just roll into the executive session at 5. What's that?
Am I invited to these?
Yes,
Will you send me an invite or?
yeah, we will. We go to 11:30 to 3.
We want to do it that way, or if we do that, regular meeting sorted, does that be a lot of potential community involvement for those people that have regular jobs that they can't speak on next week?
We could flip the executive session in between.
Oh, that's a good point.
We could do executive
That way
session.
we're awake for that.
And then that would keep it time bound.
I like that. What do you guys, are you okay with that, Tina and Gary? Doing the executive session before the regular session so that when we start the regular session, it'll be closer to a time when folks are home from work?
Like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Can we back it up so we're not starting until afternoon?
Like, are you thinking by afternoon, like 1 o'clock, or are you thinking like 12?
I mean, I heard 11:30 and I know that's gonna be rough and a long day. I was thinking if we could start noon would be the earliest I would want to start.
Is it noon to 3?
3 hours for retreat. Well, I guess if we're rolling some of our repeat topics from the executive session, then maybe that's okay. That's, 3 hours is probably reaching people's maximum time of efficiency. Then executive session from 3:30 to 4:30, and then board meeting from 5 to 6.
12 to 3, 3:30 to 4:30 or?
Mhm.
4:30. Starting at 5.
Let's get 5 to 6.
Sorry,
It'll be 5 to 6.
I'm here for the regular meeting.
So we would need, John, we would need our attorney at 3:30.
Yeah, unless you wanted him there to role play some of the things or through the retreat as well.
So do we want him there too?
You may want to bring some scenarios that are already scripted that he's had to deal with that maybe would be good. So that way we don't even inadvertently reference anything current or past.
John, would you be able to do that?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Like the last part of the retreat, if we held that for discussions around GBA and using those policies, like we could role play that together, that last part. So if you came at like 2 o'clock,
Oh,
and we can talk about it more.
whatever you,
We have a lot of meaty stuff. How many minutes do we think we're going to role play? I'm just asking them.
I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. Like, I think we have 50 agenda items right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be a packed meeting. I'm not.
it would be interpretive dance or
Yeah.
role play, interpretive dance.
I know. We like.
And we have some concrete stuff we're going to talk about at the executive session that might actually take the place of some of the role playing, because we're going to have real life examples that we have
I mean,
to deal with.
I think regardless if he's there at 2
Oh, yeah.
o'clock, we're gonna have a whole bunch of questions for him, so I'm not worried about using his time correctly, even if,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I don't think we should spend more than an hour. I don't know.
I can come at 1, I mean at 2.
2? Sure.
And then if it's role play or not, just he'll be available, just roll into. All right, we'll get those invites, and then Tina, we can work on the agenda and get it out by July 1st.
And you've got agenda items from tonight that we put on there.
Oh, yeah, we have about 4 days of
Okay,
items.
yeah, that's what we need to be efficient
Yeah.
and get all the information out before the meeting so we can read it before.
It'll help us to- Can I ask you, whenever that comment is made, get the meeting out before, I just want to clarify, is there anything that you're not getting before the meetings?
No, the stuff that you're sending out is all great. That's why I complimented you and your team on it. You're getting that stuff out almost a week in advance. That's really helpful to go through. Now, this month was a little different because we got to review a lot of the policies last month and we didn't discuss because of the fire threat. So no, I think you getting that stuff out in advance is, I think it's the board discussion stuff that we need to try to figure out, board member agenda items or concerns or things. I think that's where we have trouble getting information out in advance because there's not really a vehicle, although it sounds like Natalie suggested based on how city council does it, we can send things to you and then you can send it out, and that's great. So people can look at it beforehand and then we can actually address things and not put them off month after month, especially when something's out, by policy, a shorter time turnaround.
I think we should discuss that, yeah. for sure.
Discuss that. Yeah, sounds good, great. Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else? We're good? Move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Johnson.
Aye.
Moen.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Bedovich.
Aye.
8:47.